Soul Sparks, we dive deep into deep currents of healing, consciousness, and sacred remembering. I'm your host, Saima, and today we welcome the radiant Roxanne Chaput, a globally renowned luminary speaker and visionary guide known as a Sacred One. Roxanne leads soul leaders through multidimensional healing, uniting elemental wisdom with embodied purpose. Her work is not just healing, it's initiation. And today, she's here to help us explore what it truly means to reclaim ourselves through self actualized healing. Roxanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a beautiful honor to be here with you today.
You're warmly welcome. It's my pleasure to have you here. So, like your path is so rich with sacred leadership. That's so remarkable. I'm really curious to know that what does self actualized healing mean to you at the soul level?
Absolutely. So, self actualized healing is really about our own self awareness, our own self accountability, and our own pathways of actually being able to actualize our own physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual healing. And we see a lot of that tangibility in terms of, when our physical body is healing, we understand that our body has the power and the significance to actually heal itself, as does the emotional body, as does, the mental, intellectual body, and the spiritual and astral body.
Mm, that's remarkable, Roxanne. So, can you share that how does it differ from conventional or clinical approaches to healing?
Absolutely. So, before any of the Western medicines were introduced, we did have Eastern medicines, but even before, those practices, we really had this beautiful ancient spiritual practices that happened within the spiritual communities and the tribal communities throughout the world. Before medicine, before science was introduced into the planetary system, we solely depended on our tribal healers and, the spiritual pathways, the natural remedies, the medicines, all of these elements that actually were very conducive to our healing and to a multidimensional healing, not just, one aspect of our healing. So when we're healing the physical body, it's not just about healing the physical body. There's multidimensional interdimensional layers that are actually all intersected, and they're all collaborative, and they all have communication pathways that merge and have an emergence together. So, we see a lot of this in terms of not just, in the pharmaceutical industry, but even in, therapeutic industries and, counseling services, psychologists, neuropsychologists, all of these elements, they're realizing that when they're working with the mental or the emotional body, that there's more to it. It's not actually affecting healing. It's providing incredible toolkits and incredible, pathways that people can have a little bit of those aha moments and a bit of those actualized, realizations of what is actually transpiring within them. But because it's so deeply layered and not just into, the emotional or the mental body, it's imprinted in the cellular field. It's imprinted in the energetic field. So we have to go a little bit of a layer deeper, and we have to keep exploring that, because that's what we call full holistic healing. And this is why a lot of practitioners, even medical doctors, are looking at different ways, which is very a little bit more contradictory to, scientific measure. But if we bring in the quantum science aspect of this, and we bring in, traditional practices and ancient practices before science was introduced, this is the importance that we're going through a multi-dimensional healing. We're actualizing, and we're actually realizing that it's not just an emotional problem. It's not just, a mental problem. It's not just a physical problem. In order for something to actually have impact to us, it has to enter the energetic field. If it's a word, if it's an action, if it's an experience, it has to enter that energetic field in order to actualize in any of our aspects of our physical, linear body. So this is why so many practitioners globally around the world are not just looking at Western medicine, they're looking at Eastern medicine, and they're looking at ancient practices because there's an emergence, there's a collaboration, there's a bridging that can happen that can actually affect true healing. And that's why we're discovering that, just one aspect of healing is not actually self-actualized healing. It's just a window.
That's such a powerful perspective, Roxanne. I mean, I really appreciate the way you highlighted the inner journey and the role of personal consciousness in healing. It's really enlightening to hear that how self-actualized healing centers more on self-awareness and growth rather than just symptom management, right?
Absolutely. And, we have a little bit of a culture that we want the easy way and we want instant gratification. And that comes to our own healing journey as well. When in reality, in order for something to be imprinted, in order for us to have an emotional or a mental or a physical experience, it means that it's rooted somewhere. And when it's rooted somewhere, it means that it's rooted within the energy centers. So, our centers of intelligence, which we, often refer to as the chakra system, and our meridians and our energy field and our astral field, all of these elements are congruent when we're actually healing something. If something happens in childhood, there's soul loss that happens, there's energetic loss that happens, sovereign power, removes itself. And how do we recall that back? How do we come back into a state of remembrance? And how do we actually understand what the rooted aspect of is? Why are we behaving in a certain way? Why are we having symptoms of a certain nature? Why is our body carrying diseases? Why is our body carrying illness? Why is our body creating or, experiencing dis-ease, discomfort within itself? How do we, come into this body that is not working in the cohesiveness and the harmonification of itself? How do we bring all of our bodies, right? The astral, the emotional, the physical, the intellectual, all of these elements, how do we bring these into synergetic alignment and work in harmony with one another? That is when we start tapping into self-actualized healing. Nothing is ever just one layer. Nothing is ever just in the mental body, the emotional body, the physical body, anything of that nature. There's always deeper layers. That's why they call it, when we go through a healing journey, we're peeling back the onion layers. We're going through a period of deconstruction because there's layers to why we behave. There's a way, of why the reasonings that and how we react to life and how we sit in the emotionality of life, how we go into depression, how we go into anxiety, how we go into illness. All of these elements are happening at a multidimensional level.
That makes so much of sense, Roxanne. Now, in a world full of noise and distraction, how do we begin to attune to our soul's voice again?
This is, such a beautiful thing because the soul always speaks to us. And a lot of the time we ignore it or, we don't listen to the pathway of where our soul is actually speaking to us. So, if we're speaking from, our own spiritual channel of our intuition, our instinctiveness, our, those beautiful gifts that we just have that knowingness. And when we allow our soul to rise to speak in its voice and we listen to the whispers of the soul, what happens is that the soul then becomes fortified, it becomes stronger, and it becomes a little bit more loud because it actually knows that it's being heard, and it becomes a little bit more chattery because it knows that it's being acknowledged. And this is the piece is that we're not just a physical being. I mean, it's proven in every spiritual, practice, every, religious structure. It's proven in scientific measure that we are made of energy and our energy can never be created nor can it be destroyed, right? So we know that scientifically and we know that through religious structure as well. Everything is congruent in that line, regardless if we refer to it as a soul and a spirit, and regardless if they refer to it as energy, we know that there's something beyond us that is the actual divination and the beauty of in which we are. That is the most incredible aspect of who we are is our soul essence, our energetic essence. So when we are coming into this place of acknowledging our soul, when we go through life and we are being guided in a direction, but the mind and the ego start to control, the direction of our pathway, and we become more analytical than we become intuitive. we're not actually listening to the refinement and to the inner tuning of our actual divine spirit and our divine soul. We're actually going from a pathway and we're living in a pathway in, the egoic center. Not that the ego is bad, the ego is absolutely beautiful, but it has a purpose, and its purpose is not to be, running the ship. The purpose is not for it to be driving the car and driving our being, right? That is the soul. That's the soul's purpose. The ego is there for our survival because we're human and we came here to experience humanness, on the earth plane. So that, and we have spiritual ego as well. I won't, tap into that right now. But when we think about how we conduct our life. Are we actually coming from fear? Are we coming from scarcity? Are we coming from lack? Are we making decisions based on this? Are we basing our decisions on our knowingness? Are we basing our decisions on those little whispers that our intuition's like, I don't think so. This doesn't feel in my highest alignment. Oh, yeah, like this feels incredible. Like this feels like a heck yes throughout the entirety of like my being, right? Like there is that point of differentiation of how we can start to understand what actually feels in congruency with us, what actually feels that we're not trying to fulfill an aspect of a lacking aspect of who we are. So are we trying to fulfill happiness? Are we trying to fulfill peace? Are we trying to fulfill, you know, love? Are we trying to fulfill identity? What are we actually trying to do in terms of our soul's desires? And are those desires actually coming from the ego, or are they actually coming from the soul? And the more that we listen to the soul, you'll never hear somebody say that, oh man, I shouldn't have listened to my intuition. Right? Like it's
Mm.
the cognitive brain makes decisions, and our gut also has a brain. Our intuitiveness has a brain. It's been proven in science. Our heart also has a brain. So does all of our energy centers. That is my belief, that every center of intelligence that we have, every chakra system that we have is actually a center of intelligence. It's actually a neural pathway that actually conducts itself, calculates information, and makes decisions. When we're making decisions multidimensionally as conscious leaders within our own life, we are making decisions that are heart, mind, spirit aligned, because we're working in a place from harmony. So the more that we choose to lean into listening to what we know, what we're being asked or where we're being guided, that is the pivotalness of it. That is the beauty of it. When you are in a crossroads in life and you have to make a decision, even in your daily life, we make a thousands, millions of choices every single day. When we are faced with something, if I'm gonna, choose a nutritional pathway and I'm gonna choose something that doesn't honor my entire temple and doesn't, honor my being, I made a choice to not listen to what my actual soul needs, right? Because my soul will always want my highest alignment. So
Mm.
when am I choosing to lean into those aspects and to actually listen? Or when am I allowing something, egoic or a wounding experience to actually be fulfilled instead of actually listening to my own intuition, my own intuitiveness, my own knowingness? When we listen to those aspects of the soul, we don't ever have remorse or guilt. We don't ever have remuneration of, regret, even though I don't believe in regret and all these things, but we go through all of this dialect in the mind that maybe I shouldn't have chosen that. And that is the indicator that tells us that we're not listening to our intuition, and we're not listening to our soul essence. We're not listening to the whispers. We're actually disregarding them. And what happens is the soul tends to speak a little bit less, a little bit less. The more that we don't listen, a little bit less, a little bit less, where it becomes so hard to connect with our own intuition and our own soul presence that we disconnect from our own selves. And that's why we see such a high volume of emotional distress, mental distress, all of these things, even physical distress, is because we're actually disconnected from our souls. We're disconnected from the emotion. We're disconnected from the mental body, and we're disconnected from the physical body. So when we're making those decisions, is does this feel in the congruency as me? Is this actually bringing value into my life by making this decision? By hearing what is being expressed to me, or is it actually detracting value from my life? And that is where you're going to have the measure of, is this actually my soul, or is this an ego wanting to fulfill something that is very fleeting and very temporary, or is this something that is actually going to fulfill my pathway? And like I said, the more that we listen, the more chattier our soul becomes, and the less that we listen, the less chatty that the soul becomes. And a lot of times what will happen is if the soul really wants to be heard, we'll have moments of deep awakening that will be orchestrated in order for us to start paying attention.
That was beautifully said, Roxanne. I mean, it's such a grounding reminder that beneath all the noise, our soul is always speaking. We just have to learn how to listen again. And you are bringing that kind of presence into this conversation, honestly.
Thank you. And I think there's this piece is that we think that there's only one modality to listen to our soul. And, a lot of people will go into stillness and quietness and meditation. But in the actuality, yes, the soul will speak a little bit more loudly because the noise is a little bit less. So we can hear a little bit more intently and more clearly. But in actuality, we're always connected to our spirit and we're always connected to divine intelligence. And all of this information is always there for us to tap into. Is, do we choose to lean in? Do we choose to listen? Do we choose, to honor our pathway? Do we choose to honor our highest alignment? And when you're driving in the car, a random thought populates into your head, or you just have a little in your gut, like, no, you know what? I don't think I'm not going to pursue this. I'm going to say no. I'm going to honor myself. All of these elements are what the soul is indicating to you and speaking to you. And it's just important that we start acknowledging it and we stop writing it off and we stop, saying, oh, no, like that's just a thought process. No, when it comes in a moment and it's like a drip, it's like all of a sudden you just thought of something and you were totally not doing anything of that nature. You were thinking about something else and all of a sudden something became very clear to you. That is your soul speaking to you, right? That's your intuition running up to the command center of the brain and it's signaling something to you like, hey, pay attention here. I have something here for you.
Mm.
Here's a little nugget. Here's a little nugget along your pathway. Here's a little treasure. Why don't you follow this and see what else you're gonna fall you're gonna find and follow on your pathway.
Absolutely, absolutely. Could not agree more, Roxanne. Now, you guide leaders through profound transformation. So, can you share that? How do you gently help them move through that fear?
Absolutely. So I work with thousands of leaders throughout the world, and a lot of what happens is that, even as conscious leaders, we also have our own blind spots and we also are always in our own healing journey. As you know, this journey is never ending. We always have moments of deep realization, deep awakening, and that is the point of the journey, is to be in humility and to be in humbleness, to be able to receive and accept and acknowledge and, to understand and to understand what is actually being presented to us. And a lot of the times we think that we're at this certain level of our own self mastery, but we also have to be very cognizant and very, not in our ego, that there's always more to excavate. There's always more to explore. There's always more to discover within ourselves because we are limitless. The way that we create life and we create our own life is limitless, as is our own healing journey because we are limitless. There's always an element within our soul memory, within our soul essence, within who we are. And as we explore and as we move through life and how, we honor ourselves, honor our integrity, honor our self respect, honor our self love, acceptance, all of these elements, there's always another layer that we can always deepen within ourselves. So when leaders are running incredible industries throughout the world or even within their own communities, are they coming from a place that they are actually looking to continuously and be in this embodiment of self-actualized healing? Because at the end of the day, healed leaders heal communities and heal the world, right? It's global impact. The way that we influence, the way that we carry ourselves, even not being a conscious leader of a business, being a conscious leader within my own life, we create change. We are the change, being the change. People aren't moved. People do not come into a place of, I really want to be able to get to that place for myself by words and by expression. It's by a state of being. We witness somebody have inner peace, inner love, unconditional love for themselves, self acceptance, grace, compassion, all of these elements. And we're like, how do I get that? How do I attain that? How do I nurture that within myself? Those are the questions because of that state of being. So when we are in retreat space and we hold space, we ask very deep, profound questions to understand the rootedness of why they make the decisions that they make on, every single day. Are the decisions only from the logical sense and the analytical sense? Are they encompassing and are they embodying the mind, body, and spirit when they're making these decisions that actually have global impact? Is it from a place that is they're fulfilling from scarcity? Are they moving into greed? Are they moving into all of these elements? There's so much uncovering and discovering that happens within these retreat spaces because they're actually able to be honest with themselves because the questions are very reflective in order for somebody to actually come into this place and be like, you know what? This is where I could have chosen something different for myself. This is where I could have chose a different pathway. This is where I could honor this pathway. This is where there's a lot of that dialect. There's a lot of that introspection and that self-reflection that occurs within those spaces.
There's such depth in what you just shared, Roxanne. Like the idea that our lives are limitless and that healing isn't a destination. It uh it really speaks to how inner work doesn't just transform us but naturally extends outward, uplifting others and like what you said, heal leaders, heal community. That line really lands. It reminds me that personal healing is actually a form of service.
It is. Yeah, it absolutely is a form of service. And it's not about saying, I'm serving or I'm doing this or I'm doing that. Is how can I be a better human being? And it's not always about this place of being better or being greater. That's not, what that reference means is how can I be in my embodiment and honor myself and be proud of who I am stepping into. A lot of the times we only see laterally, we're only able to see, where we could potentially move into, but in actuality, we're actually always in a place of elevation. And how can I elevate myself? How can I elevate my brand? How can I, elevate my product? How can I elevate all of these elements that are in congruency of conscious integrity, right? It's about coming back to that integral piece. If I am leading and I am saying, it's important that we are doing this and we're self-actualized healing, but behind closed doors I'm not actualizing anything that I am speaking into existence. There's no congruency there, there's no alignment there, there's no integrity there. So how do I step in and be more integrous with myself, and how do I actually become the change and not be focused on who it's going to impact? Because at the end of the day, we don't have control of who it's going to resonate with, who it's going to actually impact. All we can do is be responsible for ourselves and accountable for ourselves. And as global leaders, it's important that we are accountable and we are responsible for ourselves, and we're not projecting and we're not, regurgitating and we're not vomiting and all of these things, these woundings and these experiences and these unhealed, traumas, experiences that we have. And we then, lead from a place of false perspective, false ideology, false perception, and we're making decisions based on that, and we're not honoring anything else in terms of who we actually innately are.
It's really humbling to think that way. Now, for those listening and feeling the call to deeper healing, what's one sacred truth you'd like to offer them to begin their journey?
Absolutely. The most beautiful place of really just stepping into a little bit more of the density and the propensity of who we, if somebody really wants to understand, like, what is my spirit? What are these elements? I would say, the cellular retreat is probably the best retreat space because it's really about looking at somebody multidimensionally and supporting them multidimensionally as they start to activate and as they start to go through activated awakenings and activated realizations. Our silent retreat is actually a really beautiful space as well because it has a lot of introspection and a lot of self-reflection, but it's really important that we're able to attune to, the mind, body, soul, spirit in order to actually come into that place to actually be reflective in a 360-degree angle and not at a 180-degree angle. So I would say the cellular retreat would probably be the most ideal in order to come to their own self-actualization, self-realizations, and self-awakening.
Thank you for sharing that. It's such a grounding truth to begin with, actually, Roxanne. You know,
Mm.
sometimes just hearing these words is enough to stir something awake in us. And Roxanne, you reminded us that healing isn't just something we do, it's someone we become. It's a sacred act of reclaiming our voice, our truth, and our divine rhythm in a world that often forgets its song. So, listeners, if you're feeling stirred, follow that whisper. The path is within you, and the light, it's